Good point. Okay, Lucy, you're doing that?
Yep, it's recording.
Perfect. All right, perfect. Welcome, everyone. As I said, I'm sure more people will be joining this discussion. It's not going to be a long discussion. I just wanted to go over with you a little bit, I guess, give you a preview of the course this semester. And I know that you've already received some emails about it. You received a memo and then hopefully a video. And this is for both directors and facilitators to know what we're going to be doing this semester, and especially in the facilitation of the small groups. We want it to be very directed this semester in a specific way. And so I wanted to give anyone who is a facilitator time to work on that a little bit because it's going to take not a lot of work, a little work. And actually, the work is more personal work. It's more work on me as a person than it is on let me read these 5 books or anything like that, because that's the nature of this class. So I am going to share my screen right now, and I am going to walk you through. Um, there we go. Walk you through the slideshow, and it should inform you of how we want the coach to go this semester. I'm very excited about this class. This class is going to be focusing on Jesus, and we're going to be focusing on Jesus specifically through the Gospel of Mark. So we're calling this Encountering Jesus in Mark's Gospel. Obviously, there are a lot of things that we could do, digging into Mark, exploring Mark, talking about all the nuances of Mark, that kind of thing. But sometimes when we do that, Jesus gets lost a bit. We really want to see the story of Jesus as told through Mark's gospel, and we want people to focus on who Jesus is. And we're going to take our what we learned 2 semesters ago about being, knowing, and doing, and apply that in a Bible study. Apply that in a devotional time. And that really is the course that we're going to be having this semester, something that we learned and applying that now to our Bible, studying our time with God. So we're going to be taking being, knowing, and doing, working through the Gospel of Mark, but looking at Jesus and learning from him about being, knowing, and doing. Okay. Before I go any farther along, let me take a moment to invite you to our Telios conference, which is coming up at the end of February. It's going to be in San Antonio, Texas, and I realize you can't get there. However, it's also going to be streamed online and it's all going to be recorded. And for all the schools of missions, you're able to apply free for the streaming and the videos. I think the code is School of SOM 2026. SOM 2026. But you're going to need to register for that. And you can have watch parties with your students. You can share the videos with your students. But you've got to register because we want to know how many people have registered. It's going to be fantastic. You can actually go online just very simply to teliosconference.com and see the full slate of speakers. And you can also register online as well. This is what it'll look like. You hit the registration button, you fill in your information. There will be a code, a place for a code, SOM 2026. So far, only 2 of our schools have signed up for this. And so it's a great opportunity, not just for you as a director or facilitator, but for all your students to learn from some tremendous scholars and to really do some great thinking in this on this topic, the art of becoming, which takes us back again 2 semesters, but also applies to this semester in what we're going to be doing in the Gospel of Mark. So these things fit together very, very well. So hopefully you will take advantage of that. February 26th through 28th, the Telios Conference. We're co-hosting it with the Institute of the Study of Contemporary Spirituality at Oblate School of Theology. All right, now back to what we're going to be doing this semester. First off, let me say Thank you to all the school directors, academic directors, and facilitators for your support. This could not happen without you. And so we are cognizant of that, and we are incredibly grateful for the work that you put into getting the students ready, making sure that the students are there, making sure that the students stay on to connect in the discussion groups. We know that you are behind the scenes making all of that happen, and we're very grateful. If you are volunteering as a facilitator, or maybe you've been volunteered to be a facilitator, either way, we're grateful. We're grateful that you're taking that extra time to be with the students. And that is an opportunity for you to really impact the lives of these young thinkers during that time. And so I hope hopefully all of us as facilitators will really put our hearts into this study so we can set a good example for all of our students of how to get the most out of the Gospel of Mark, focusing on Jesus. Now, here's the goal. Every class you ever teach ought to have a goal, okay? So sometimes this is called the outcome. But the outcome of this class is to help students deepen their connection to Jesus as they read his story in Mark. Okay? It's about connection. It's about becoming. It's about focusing on Jesus. It's about getting to know Jesus better. It's about falling deeper in love with Jesus. That's what this semester is all about. Many things we could focus on in Mark's gospel, but really what we're looking for is connection, especially in the categories of being, knowing, and doing. So, as a facilitator, that's your goal. You want to help the students get more connected to Jesus this semester. It's going to take some work on their part, it's going to take some work on your part as well. Now, for each class, there are two assignments. And actually, the first assignment should have begun 2 weeks ago. We got the information out, and hopefully, you got it to the students because it's going to take a little time between classes for students to just read and reflect. It's not reading books, it's not diagramming sentences, it's not parsing Greek verbs. It's simply reading and reflecting on the life of Jesus, which is great, right? Um, but that still takes time because we have about 3 chapters between each session. So there is a reading assignment. You've been given the reading assignment. The students should have received the reading assignment. I'm going to post it at the very end of this as well. It's around 3 chapters, but I'll just say this. Over the past few weeks, I've been doing this assignment because I wanted to get myself ready. If you really are going to read the material carefully, and slowly and reflectively, it takes time. You can't wait till Wednesday and be ready for a class on Thursday. It just won't work. There's just too much material. And also as a facilitator, you can't go through all 3 chapters in the hour that you have. It's too much material. I wish we could spread this out over 6 months, but that's not what we're doing. We have a few weeks to do all 16 chapters, which means that there's about 3 chapters a week. So as a facilitator, you have to be aware of that, and you have to first do the work yourself, reflect on Mark yourself, and secondly, come into that discussion group knowing I can't go through all the scriptures. What do I want to highlight? Or maybe even asking the students, what should we highlight this week? Um, I'll talk more about that. And also, there's a video from the Thread podcast that needs to be viewed. We're going back to what we did 2 semesters ago. We have some videos before the class, we have some reading before the class, and then we're going to have a teacher. I'll go on to that slide next. We're going to have a teacher in the class teaching on knowing, being, and doing in the class session. Then we're going to go into the discussion groups, okay? Now, some have said this is flipping the classroom. It's not really flipping the classroom because flipping the classroom takes a lot more work than what this is. This is more of us actually doing what we did 2 semesters ago, getting some prep work in before the class begins, and it being much more reflective. much more devotional than a flipping the classroom type situation where you might be talking about culture and things like that. Okay. So a teacher will present each of the classes, 6 classes, and then facilitators will facilitate their discussion group. For just a small little time, I'm going to remind us of the ecosystem of becoming. I won't be going over this with the students. This is just for us. This happened 2 semesters ago. It also happened at our forum that we had in Bengaluru. We talked about becoming. So when I think of the ecosystem of becoming, being, knowing, and doing, I think about heart, being, I think about head, knowing, and I think about hands and feet, doing. And these are the things we want to focus on in the ministry of Jesus and by looking at his life in Mark's gospel. This is the representation that Dr. Pakta came up with of the symbiotic relationship between these 3 ideas. We should not think of being, knowing, and doing as silos that are separate from each other and cordoned off from each other. They flow into each other, they work together. And as we go through being, knowing, and doing in the life of Jesus, one of the things we want to be aware of is one student might connect more with the being question that week. That's fine. Another one might connect with doing. There's nothing wrong with that. That maybe that's where their heart is. Maybe that's where they're thinking that week. Um, and they do flow into each other, back and forth into each other. For a minute, I'm just going to explain this chart. If you don't have it, take a picture of it. You probably have it somewhere. It's a really good chart. And I'm going to start with being because that's where I usually start because I think personally, I think that's where we should start, but also I think that's what we talk about the less. So I'm going to start there. And I'm going to work on the outward circle. Being flows into doing, and you can look at Colossians 3:12 through 14 to read about that. And then doing flows into and informs knowing, which you can go to John 7:17 or Hebrews 5:14 for that. And then knowing helps us by liberating us, maturing us, and renewing us to work on our being. The things that we experience help us become different people in Christ and help us with our identity. And then there's a number of verses to work on with that. Notice in the very middle of that graph or that image there, everything's connected in the middle. So you could jump actually from being to doing or being to knowing, or they could all 3 meet in the middle. This is how this works. They're not silos cordoned off from each other. Let's look at the inner circle, and I'll go the opposite direction. Being opens or supplies our knowing. The more we are, more we know ourselves, the more open we are to learning about ourselves. And then the knowing guides us in the things that we do. And because we know, because our identity is being shaped and we know who we are, we can go out and do things and feel genuine in the things that we're doing. And then the doing flows back into being because it shapes us and it blesses us. I'll give you an example. We started a hope work here in our ministry years and years ago, and we wanted to help specifically um, children that had special needs. Nothing like that existed in our county. And so I went to the school board and I went to different schools and I asked if we could do it. And we had to jump a lot of hurdles to get this going. It took a lot of work because people were very cautious. And who are you? And I mean, things like you can't mention Jesus. And we're like, we just want to help. We just want to help people, okay? And we also wanted to give the parents a break. And every time I would go in on a Saturday morning and help, um, I was going in just wanting to help. I knew some things and I was trying to teach some things, and I was being very active, and my hands and my feet and my brain were all involved. And you know what? I came out of that blessed. I think I came out of the activity receiving more than I gave. And that's the beauty of this symbiotic relationship of being, knowing, and doing. It fits together. And we see it fit together in the ministry of Jesus, And we're going to look at that all semester long and learn from Jesus in that way. Okay? So being has to do with who we are as a person, and we're going to ask a question about who is Jesus. And throughout Mark, Jesus is identified in different ways. Okay? Um, Jack Reese at the Blue Hole, a really wonderful book, talks about three questions with being. Talks about who are we really, what is important to us, and what do we value the most? And I would add a fourth, and I actually put it at the top of the list, and that is whose are we? These are all questions that have to do with being. Now, I sent you this out. You already have this, so I'm not going to read through the whole thing because it's long. But I just sat down and reflected one afternoon about being and what are some good questions that we can ask with being. And as facilitators, look through these questions and make sure that your students are looking through these questions. And again, you don't need to read this as you have a discussion. It's just for people to take, and they can, as they're working on looking at Jesus in the Gospel of Mark and thinking about being, here are some good questions to ask. Like, who is Jesus? What is the identity of Jesus? And I promised I wasn't going to read them all, so I'm going to stop there. You already have this material. It'd be abundantly redundant of me to read everything. Okay, and I'm not going to do that. All right. Instead, I'm going to go on to the next one. The next one is knowing. Knowing has to do with our what we understand. I think even more so what we experience in life, because so much of who we are comes from the lessons we learn by experience. And I think especially in a class like this, we're not looking to like know how deep the Sea of Galilee is. I know. Anybody else who know how far across, how far north and south and east and west is the Sea of Galilee? Yeah, I know in miles. I would have to translate it into kilometers, but but those are interesting facts, and I like those facts. I like knowing how deep the Sea of Galilee is. It's not really going to change who I am as a person, knowing that. We want some deeper questions about knowing. We want them to shape our lives. We want them to be more experiential than some of the lessons that we sometimes get in Bible class. So here's some questions, and you have this already. Lucy sent it out. She actually, I sent her basically a document. She made it beautiful. So she sent out a beautiful document with these questions on it. And again, I'm not going to read through all of them. I'll just point out a couple of things. Focusing on knowing, look at what Jesus knew in the passage and then see what he did with that knowledge. That's really important. And then lastly, pay special attention to the difficulty the disciples had in knowing Jesus, especially in 8 through 10. They didn't get Jesus. It took some time, but also see how patient Jesus was with them until they understood him, which really wasn't until after the resurrection. It's a beautiful part of the Gospel of Mark, is this question of how do we really know who Jesus is in our lives? Okay, so enough there. We'll go on to doing. Doing, of course, has to do with action, behavior. Um, our hands and our feet getting involved in what we're going to do. And I also reflected on some questions there. You have the questions. And so I'm not going to go through all of them, but it is good to ask, what's Jesus doing here? When you look at what Jesus doing, we think of Jesus so often as preaching, right? Preaching the good news, teaching, teaching the parables. But in Mark, a huge part, especially early Mark, of who Jesus was healing, a healer. He was a healer. Also, when you make that turn around chapter 8 into who Jesus was, he was a trainer and a discipler trying to get the 12, trying to get his followers to really understand him. And so it's bigger. It's Jesus's action in Mark is bigger than just preaching and teaching and also going to the cross. And so we ask these questions. Also, look at that last line. This question can also be asked of other characters in the story. So when you get to the story, for example, of the Syrophoenician woman, you can ask, what does she do? You can ask all three questions about her. Or when you look at the beautiful story of the anointing of Jesus by the woman, you can ask about being, knowing, and doing in her character. So these questions can be asked in multiple ways. All right. Now, I'm just going to take a moment here and really, literally just a moment. I don't want to keep this very long. I want to read through Mark chapter 1, verses 35 through 39, and I want you to think about each question. Okay? So I want you to first think about being. What does this verse tell us about who Jesus was, who he is, our identity with Jesus? In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a desert place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, everyone is searching for you. He answered, let us go to the neighboring towns so that I may proclaim the message there also, for this is what I came out to do. And he went throughout all Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogue and casting out demons. So take a moment, look at that passage, think about being. What does this tell us about who Jesus was, about his identity? Any specific titles used of him? Any specific ways that he related to his disciples that show us something unique about him? This is one way to reflect on Jesus, is by reflecting on his identity. And then as you do that, then you turn a corner and you say, now what does that say to me about my own identity? This is how we want to teach our students to be with the text this semester, truly reflecting on who Jesus was and who they are. Now, secondly, I'm not going to read the passage again, but you can. And the second time you read it through, you're asking a different question. And you don't have to start with being. I always do. You don't have to. You could go to knowing. Okay. What does Jesus know when you look at this passage here? What has Jesus experienced that informs who he is as a person and as the Son of God? What does Jesus know that he would like for us to know? And what can we learn from Jesus? What can we know in our lives? What can we experience in our lives? Because we're looking at the knowledge of Jesus here. That's the second question. And that's the second way to reflect on this text. So there's a lot to know that Jesus is teaching us here. Um, and you can even ask this of Jesus. You can even pray it. Jesus, show me what you want me to know. And then have a little devotional with Jesus doing that. You can actually do that with any of the characters. You can ask the Syrophoenician woman, what do you want me to know? It's a great question. For I didn't know Mary of Magdala very well until this past summer. I started having devotionals and I asked Mary, Mary, what do you want me to know about you? And I got to know her. So the third um, question or approach is doing. Okay. And you can see I mean, this is easy here in this passage. What did Jesus do? He got up in the morning while it was still dark. While apparently everybody else was still in bed, Jesus got up. And he got up and he went to a secluded place all by himself and he prayed. That tells us something about Jesus. It shows us his action, shows us who he was as a person. And then we could turn the corner and ask, what are we doing when it comes to when we wake up? Very practical question. Um, how do we begin our day? You know, but it doesn't stop there. Let us go to the neighboring towns so that we may proclaim the message there also. For that is this is what I came to do. And he went throughout all Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues. But it doesn't stop there and casting out demons. It combines the therapeutic healing ministry of Jesus with the preaching ministry of Jesus. Both were happening there. Okay. And so now, I don't know how long that took, probably 5 minutes, right? And we're talking about 4 verses. Now, imagine trying to do that with 3 chapters. That's why I'm saying this is going to take some time for people to really connect with Jesus in this way. You can't do it on a Thursday night and be ready for a Friday. That's true of your students, but hey, it's also true for all of us. It's not possible. And so I want to invite you to spend every day this semester with Jesus. I know you got other books you're reading. I do too. I pulled out a few of them right here just so you can see. Um, these are three I plan on reading in February, and I'll probably read 10 in February. And so, and this one's by Dr. Father Ronald Rollheiser. It completes his trilogy. This one is on nature and spirituality, and this one is on Celtic spirituality. And so I know you all have a stack of books like this, and your students do too. And so, but whenever we're reading books like this, we ought to also be reading the Bible, right? So, I mean, this is just a real part of who we are as God's people, is getting into the text. All right, I just have a few more points. This is the schedule. I might change it a little bit. Lucy, I was looking at it today and I might change the last two readings a little. I'll let you know if I do. Um, but for now, definitely the first 4 weeks, I think we have those in place. So when we come into class next Thursday, we're going to be working through Mark 1 through chapter 3, verse 12. Okay. Now, you already had this. This is a practical points of reading for all the students, but also for all of you. So I'm not going to read through that again. It'd be good if you have time with your students before the class, it'd be good for you to read through it with them and make sure that they have started and that they are on schedule to be ready for next week. But I do want to read through this because this is a new slide that I just came up with this week. How do we go about facilitating these discussions? Um, these are things I thought of. First, begin each discussion with a prayer. That should be intuitive, but if not, I stated it for you. Um, take some time to get to know your group. But here's the thing, don't take the whole first session doing that. You can have everybody introduce themselves and maybe have one person share a little extra. And then the next class, somebody else can share a little extra. And the next class, somebody else can share a little extra. But if you spend the whole time getting to know your students that first week, you'll never get to the Gospel of Mark. Now, the point number 3 is the most important point. Watch your time. You have an hour. And if you're not careful, you're going to spend that hour talking about one verse, and you got 3 chapters. And also, don't think you can cover 3 chapters in an hour. That's not possible. And I know it's not possible because I've been working on it and trying to do it over the last couple of weeks. I got with a friend of mine, Sheridan Wright, and we had some time together. And I said, let's get together and let's look at Mark every day. And so every day we spent some time in the Gospel of Mark. And I thought, you know what? I'll just do the first 3 chapters here, like I've got planned for the first group. And we got an hour together. We got through chapter 1. Okay. You can barely read all 3 chapters well in an hour. So you're going to have to pick and choose, and you're going to have your students pick and choose. And one way to do that is number 4, is by asking the students, all right, we got 3 chapters here. What did you learn about being this week? And then just let them talk. let them explain what they learned about being. And you're looking at your watch and you're like, okay, we just spent 20 minutes on being. We need to move on. And so you ask the second one, well, what about knowing? What did you learn about knowing this week? And in Mark 1, I mean, in Mark 1 through 3, um, they might go directly to the the first verse, beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, Son of God, and talk about the titles. And this is what I knew. This is what I learned about knowing. Or they might go to Mark 3, and you let them do that, whatever, um, whatever they saw about knowing. And you're keeping time, right? You're looking at your watch because you could spend 40 minutes on that, but then the time would be gone. And so you want to look at the last one and you ask about what about doing? What did you learn about doing this week? And somebody might say, well, I noticed that Jesus preached the good news, and that's what he was about. And you're like, amen. That's great. What else did he do? Somebody else might say, wow, I just noticed all the miracles. These chapters are full of miracle stories, and they're full of stories of Jesus healing people, and they're full of Jesus's compassion. So I saw that. Um, so you let them talk, and that's one way to do it. But if you try to read through all three chapters and make points from each section, you're not going to have time to do that. I'll just warn you, you don't have time. All right. So you have to figure out how you want to do it. And it can be each week, maybe you start a little differently. Maybe each week you start, one week you start with doing, the next week you start with knowing. However, you do that the way you want to do it. I'm just saying, point number three is the most important point. And you have to come into this with an idea of how you want to use the time well. All right. Number five, set an example. What do I mean by that? I mean, you do the work before class to get your own heart ready, to be able to share your own heart about being, knowing, and doing in the Gospel of Mark about the life of Jesus. Um, this can be a life-changing semester, not just for your students, but for you as well. It can be. It's just how you apply yourself. And so set a good example. And another point I wanted to make on this is set a good example by yourself, you not being long-winded and you not taking up all of the talk time yourself, because that might be a temptation that you got some really important things you want to share that you learned, but let the students share and then you share based on what the students are sharing. Okay? Set a good example about controlling yourself. All right? And then number five, and to me, this is really important because I'm a natural introvert. It's just who I am as a person. And I can sit in a discussion and I can be quite content not ever saying anything. That's just who I am. But what we want to draw people out, and we don't want to we want the ones who they're not natural at speaking up. We want to draw them out and have them speak up. And we want to make sure that the people that tend to take over, they don't take over. Okay? And so that's part of a facilitator's job is to make sure that everybody feels comfortable and everyone is heard from in the group. Um, okay. And I think that's all. Yeah, that's all. Okay. Are there any quick questions before I sign off? And I think Lucy has some housekeeping um, things. I can't stop sharing. Anyone have a question? You can speak up because I can't see your hands. There we go. No, we're good. Okay, good. Have a great week and have a great time getting ready for this
My
class.
hand was up.
I'm sorry?
My hand was up.
Okay, go ahead, Emmanuel. You have a question.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I have a question. I want to say thank you for the presentation. I pretty much like what you said about the ecosystem and how some students might feel more inclined at the time to doing, at the time to being, at the time,
Yeah.
to be becoming. So how do we help students who are stuck in a particular sphere, who may think that, well, this is me, this is who I am, I'm more of a thinker, I'm not a doer, or I'm a doer. How do we get them out to begin to experience the whole ecosystem without pushing them, encourage them to experience the whole ecosystem of doing, being, and knowing?
Okay. I mean, the best way I think to get students to explore is just to ask questions, and more importantly, to teach them what questions to ask. And so you can help them see, have you thought about asking this of Jesus here? Have you thought about just asking Jesus, who are you? Jesus, tell me. That's a being question. So if that's where they're stuck, um, but actually each category and the questions that I gave should help each student to explore that a bit more. And maybe they're just uncomfortable and they need some time, and that's fine. Um, but part of our role as facilitators, and I would also say as teachers, is that we don't answer all the questions, but we teach good questions and teach them to answer the questions. That to me is the work of a good teacher. Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Stella.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Steve, for this. Really very helpful. That's about watching the time.
Yeah.
It's really very key because I know some of the class that I've facilitated in the past, this was like a major issue. So it's a good thing that you brought this to the forefront, and that's really very helpful to bear this in mind. Question, you did say that give the students, that's point six, give the students who are less inclined to share an opportunity to, which is good. We tend to do that. But what if you have a situation where majority of the students you have in your group are those that are inclined to not want to share? But then you have the takeovers who, in a manner of speaking, tend to keep the discussion lively and keep it going. So how do you strike the balance if you tend to have a lot more who are introverted and not inclined to sharing, and you have to do more work of trying to like pull them out of themselves? So yeah. So
Yeah.
how do you balance that?
Um, I think one is setting an example yourself of how you share and how you can share briefly and meaningfully. Um, I think secondly, um, you have to find gentle ways of pulling people into the conversation. You don't ever want to embarrass somebody. And if somebody says, maybe somebody says to class, I've had a really hard week and I haven't even had a chance to look at this. And you're like, okay, I understand. Um, then listen. And if anything comes up, please say something. So we don't want to embarrass people, but we find gentle ways of including people. Um, yeah. And I think the more you get to know the students, the more you know if you'll be able to actually pull them into the discussion or not. Good, good. Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
great. Lucy has a few things that she wants to go over, some housekeeping matters, and I look forward to seeing all of you next week.